week. I've actually called the Walk Talk New Wine Old Wineskins, and although the kind of the bit of the Bible, the story talked about in this part of the Bible, that actually appears in 3 places in 3 of the Synoptic Gospels. I'm just going to use the particular passage from Matthew 9:16, verses 16 and 17. For those of you who aren't familiar with the word synoptic, by the way, the books Matthew, Mark, and Luke are called the Synoptic Gospels because there's a lot of similarities between them, and a lot of the same stories come up, though not all of the same stories come up in each book. So what's also key about this story of new wine is that it does appear in all 3 of the Synoptic Gospels, which suggests that it's fairly important and we need to take some notice of it. So that's a good thing. So just to give you some context to this little bit of the Bible, because we're only looking at 2 verses here, and from when I did my sort of theology course recently, one of the key things they talked about was making sure you're looking at the context where a verse sits, because it's very easy to take something out of context and maybe read things into it that aren't there. So the context is that Jesus has told 9 different. There's been 9 different stories that have happened where Jesus has interacted with different people who have been in trouble for various things. Some have been sick, some have had broken bodies, and some are in danger. So we've got the story of the leper, the centurion's servant, the sick mother, there's a stormy sea, there's a demonized man, there's a paralyzed man, there's a dead girl and a sick woman, 2 blind men and a mute man. And all this stuff's been dealt with throughout Matthew 8 to 10. And we see this piece about new wine and old wineskins being put in there, and it actually comes after the paralyzed man and just before the dead woman. So that's potentially quite important. Okay, so this is the actual piece of scripture we're going to look at, so I'll just read it out. So, no one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, for the patch will pull away from the garment, making the tear worse. Neither do people pour new wine into old wineskins. If they do, the skins will burst, the wine will run out, and the wineskins will be ruined. No, they pour new wine into new wineskins, and both are preserved. So where this actually, sort of coming in a little bit narrower now, where this actually comes is that Jesus has done some pretty provoking things, and now including healing a man on the Sabbath, which has really annoyed the religious authorities. And now John's disciples have come to him to ask him some questions, and this piece of text comes at the end of that dialogue, where he's described not only the fact that sorry, it's just the people walking up there. He's described not only how the bridegroom is here, and we wouldn't sort of be fasting while the bridegroom is here, because John's disciples are asking about fasting, but also it comes as John's disciples are sort of inquiring who he is really, and what he's doing. And the key thing that's also important here, this bit with the bridegroom also points to that text in Isaiah 62:5, which sort of talks about God as the bridegroom. So Jesus is associating himself with God here as well. This is also really important to understand as we look at this part of the Bible. Right, so let's look at the first part of that passage. The first part of the passage talked about cloth. Now, both of these kind of images of new cloth being sewn onto an old garment and a new patch being put on an old wineskin are referring to the covenant, and Jesus being the new covenant. And what Jesus is doing effectively, he's saying that the people that have carried the old covenant are not going to be fit to carry the new covenant, because they won't. And he's specifically talking here to the Pharisees and the religious authorities of the day. And as a result, that covenant won't sit with them, because it would break out of them. It would be ineffective. It would not be something that they would be able to kind of hold on to and deliver, because of where they're at and where their hearts are at. And what I've also found helpful when you look at this is, of course, when we think about wine today, we're looking at the wine piece. We often think about wine in terms of bottles. Well, of course, when this passage was written, wine wasn't held in bottles; it was held in these skins. And these are the skins. Here's an image of what the skins would have looked like that they're referencing within this piece of text. Now, the reason why the wine skins wouldn't be reused is that when the alcoholic liquids put in them, the actual alcohol kind of expands, as you'll find in a bottle normally when it pops sometimes, and it stretches the skin so that the skin would be fully stretched when it had a wine in it and that wine had grown old. So what Jesus is pointing to here is this idea that actually you would never put an unstretched piece of cloth on there because it would rip and tear. So it's really important that to the people of the day, they would have really understood this image, and it would have made an awful lot of sense to them. And actually, what he was suggesting would almost be, it'd be like describing something quite glib and that was really obvious to everyone, which isn't necessarily always clear to us, just because we don't deal in wineskins every day. The key thing here is, though, that in these wineskins not being able to hold this gospel, Jesus is pointing to the fact that actually the gospel is going to be largely spread by the Gentiles, because actually as the new covenant comes in, what we're seeing is that the gospel is being broadened out, and it's not just being offered to the Jews who have traditionally been God's people, but it's been broadened out through Jesus to incorporate a much broader group of people who under this new covenant, which includes us and the Gentiles, which is a fantastic thing, who can hold this new wine, because they are not old wineskins, they are new wineskins who haven't got the history and background that has made them old and stretched and inappropriate for what they want to do. Okay, and here's an image of what a wineskin bursting might look like. So because the gospel would not sit within these old wineskins and it needed new vexel ones, the Pharisees would be unable to take it forward. And actually, if you look at the Luke kind of telling of this particular story, Luke 5:37, it's almost like Jesus, the way Luke caps it, is almost as if Jesus is almost telling them a joke when he says in verse 27, and no one pours new wine into old wineskins, almost making a statement, how ridiculous would that be? And he's really it feels like he's really trying to make that point, that the Pharisees and the teachers would need to change their thinking and their understanding of who God is, because they've not recognized Jesus, they've not seen him, and as a result, their fundamental relationship with God isn't right, because it's addicted to rituals and rules and all this kind of law stuff that God has given them. And what they've failed to see through that is the fact that all of the story of the Bible points to Jesus, because they focused on the letter of the law instead of what the meaning of the law might be. So that's a whistle-stop tour through what this means. Now, I put a big stop sign in here, because you might think, well, hold up a minute. Well, that's all very interesting. We've got some people who are, lived quite a long time ago, who didn't really understand Jesus, and as a result, they've missed him. What's that got to do with us? We obviously know who Jesus is. We've learned about him. We know all about the story now. We saw Calvary. We've heard so much more about it. But I would the reason why I put a stop sign, because I think there's a big word of caution here, because this is serious. These leaders of the Jewish community spent their whole life studying God's word. They were absolutely immersed in it, and from a very young age, they knew the scriptures inside out. They would put us all to shame, I should think, in terms of their knowledge and understanding of the scriptures, and yet they missed it. They missed Jesus, and as a result, they were deemed to be old wineskins. And the reason why I put a stop here is because I think actually it's a time to reflect and say, well, hold up a minute. What am I missing? Which bits of what's going on here am I missing? Which bits of what Jesus is doing am I missing? And what do I need to do to change that? And that's why I was so excited when Eileen sent through her prophecy, because actually that sort of idea, that winter landscape of actually we're looking at the things that need to be thrown out and changed so that God can get us ready for what's going to happen next, is really relevant to this, because actually arguably that's what the Pharisees needed to do. They needed to really look at what they were doing and what God was doing, and look beyond just what the way they'd done things in the past. So are we new wineskins? Which is a tricky question, not to accuse, but really just a reflection, a self-assessment, a kind of, what's going on here. There's things that might make us old wineskins, I was thinking about, and this is not an exhaustive list, but just things to think about, really. And I think, and hopefully these images help a little bit as well. The middle one is about not guarding your heart. Do we guard our hearts? Do we make sure that we're thinking about the things that we take on board, the media we watch, the social media we engage with? Are we thinking about the types of videos we're watching and the sorts of conversation we're having? Are we guarding our hearts in terms of what's coming in? Do we just do things because they're the way we've always done them? Do we put stuff off till tomorrow that we could do today? Are we not looking out and seeing what God's up to? Even though we're in a pandemic, God is still at work. It was great to hear what Christine's been up to with her friend Eileen. God is still at work, and we have to look up and out. And as a result of that, it's very easy, I think, to think, well, we're in this awful position and nothing's going to change. It's going to just be awful forever. And that's not true, because the God that we follow is a God of change, is a God that will come in and change things. And as a result, we need to have faith in that. And also on that issue of faith, just thinking about, actually, do we have faith for what God can do in our lives, or do we just have faith for our own abilities? I know that's something I'm really guilty of, and I'm sure many other people can empathise with that, but that's something I need to think about constantly. Do I have faith for what God can do? Because my abilities are like this little compared with what God could do, which would, well, my arms couldn't go wide enough, So, and not setting aside things that come between us and God, and that's probably coming back to where our, not guarding our hearts. Are we actively going in and rigorously clearing house and getting rid of the things that come between us and God, and finally not listening to God? I would say on that note as well, good things can sometimes come between you and God, and you need to look at them. And some things that start off good come between you and God because they start off as good, but we lose why we started them, and actually they can become sometimes an idol in themselves. So to just encourage you to just look at that and assess that in your own life. I think it's just really important to keep reflecting back. So as we come into land here, so are we new wineskins? Things that help. So there are lots of, I'm sure you're probably aware of things that can help, but it's just good to just talk about them again. And some of the things that make a big difference, and I've picked a Banksy picture up the top there because I love that picture of the girl and the heart sort of floating off. This is probably not the way the picture was intended, but for me, that always feels like sharing the gospel. As we give part of our heart away to someone else in sharing the gospel, because if we know Christ, that's something that's really ingrained in our heart, and as we share that, that's giving away part of our heart. Not that has gone, because I believe God replenishes it, but it's still a massive emotional thing, giving that away. Fresh testimony. Are we looking out and seeing what God's doing on a daily, hourly, weekly basis? Are our stories of what God's been up to in our lives new and fresh? And that's really important, because to be new wine, we need to be fresh. We need to be fresh and listening. And spending time in the Word, even if it's just a little bit, I just really encourage you to look at your Bibles once a day, just a little bit. I always remember Ruth saying to me, when she'd been sort of discouraged, sometimes I think she was talking about being scared about not being able to read massive bits, but she said someone had said to her, just read a little bit, because if you start with a little bit, you can build it up. And I would just really encourage you to do that. Just read a little bit, spend some time in the Word each day, and then act upon it. Think about what it's saying to you. Listen to it. and you will be a new wineskin because God will be actively going on there. And the other things like prayer, really important, having that conversation with God, and accountability, and dreaming with God, because actually God has massive dreams for our culture and for our country and for Arbury and for your street and your house and for you. And I would just encourage you to engage with him in that. So that's quite a lot to take in. I'm going to put this into the Bible study notes as well, so you can have a look at it during the week. But that's kind of what I wanted to say about that. God bless.